Good morning. I'm Shai Lavi from the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, and I'd like to welcome you all to our mini conference on force feeding and hunger strikes, political, legal, and ethical perspectives. So as 2014, the calendar year, is coming to a close, we wanted to invite you to reflect together on one of the more heated public controversies, legal and political, that steered attention and debate in Israel during the past year. As you surely recall, earlier this year, dozens of Palestinian prisoners launched a prolonged hunger strike. The strikers protested against Israel's use of administrative detention, a process through which it holds prisoners indefinitely without charge or trial. Due to the prolonged hunger strike, roughly 80 prisoners were hospitalized, and some of the prisoners' lives were in danger. In June 2014, in the midst of the hunger strike, the Knesset discussed a bill that would legalize forced feeding. The bill gave rise to a heated public controversy, as well as to international response. For example, the heads of the World Medical Association objected to the bill and called it tantamount to torture, explaining that force feeding is violent, often painful, and absolutely against the principles of individual autonomy. It is a degrading treatment, inhumane, and may amount to torture. Worse still, it is the most unsuitable approach to saving lives. The bill was also opposed internally by the Israeli Medical Association and by the Israeli National Bioethics Council. On the other hand, it had many supporters, and the Attorney General, Yehuda Weinstein at the time, termed the bill proportionate and balanced, and said that similar arrangements exist in other enlightened countries. Indeed, in 2013, U.S. famously force-fed administratively detained prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. Similar measures have been reportedly employed by Greece, Bahrain, Nepal, and China. The European Court of Human Rights has also discussed the question of force feeding, arriving at different conclusions. Perhaps this will come up in the discussion. In Switzerland, Ukraine, Moldova in 2005, 2007, and 2013, respectively. Eventually, due to external and internal controversy, the bill was first refined, mellowed down a bit, and ultimately was set aside, among other reasons, because the hunger strike came to an end. But this question will undoubtedly resurface in the future, as it has in the past. So the purpose of this mini conference on force feeding is to discuss the ethics of the problem, its politics, its legal implications, its sociological context. It takes the Israeli recent case as its point of departure, but it moves to examine the broader stakes in this debate, both theoretically and from a comparative perspective. So we have, obviously, at the forefront, different moral, ethical tensions, for example, between autonomy and sanctity of life, prisoner rights, state interests, the medical duty to cure against the medical duty to respect patients and do no harm. And I hope that we will discuss these questions along as several other questions that are perhaps less obvious that this controversy gives rise to. As for myself, I come to the table with two questions. They're not necessarily the most important questions, but I would like to put them on the table along with some other questions. So the first question that concerns me, and not only me, but in many ways the fellows and the center, the Edmund J. Safra Center, for the past year, has been the question of the morality of experts and moral expertise. These are in fact two related questions, but they can be separated. So first, the question of the morality of experts. Do certain experts' professions, by the virtue of belonging to a specific profession, do they have special duties and ethical commitments? And here I have in mind the medical profession first and foremost. There's also a question of moral experts. Is there such a thing as being a moral expert? So when we look at the regulation of the question of force feeding in Israel and in other places, who gets to voice their concern, whose voice has impact and weight in the public discussion. And here I have in mind specifically the ethicists, the bioethicists, but also we could expand it to the lawyers when they're not talking simply about positive law, but also about how law should be, what are the best interpretation of the law. And so then again the question rises as to whether there is such a thing as moral experts, but also not only should there be moral expertise, but also how does this moral expertise play as a matter of fact. So whether we think there should be such a thing, clearly there is such a thing, that is certain people speak in the public as experts on questions of morality, and we'd probably like to explore that as well. The second line of questioning that I'd like to put on the table has to do with the comparative perspective. So one aspect of the comparative perspective is quite straightforward, that is to look at the Israeli case within the broader international context. Similar cases, as I just mentioned, have come up in other countries, and it would be interesting to think about Israel alongside other cases. But I have also in mind a different kind of comparison, not comparing different countries on this question, but comparing other cases of force feeding. So what would it mean to look at the case of force feeding of prisoners alongside, for example, with the force feeding of anorexia patients? Or what would it mean to look at force feeding of prisoners, part of a political strike, along with the force feeding of dying patients in hospitals? Some people may think that this is an enlightening perspective. Others would challenge that this depoliticizes the specific question of force feeding. I'd like to suggest that it offers a different kind of political perspective, sociological perspective on these issues. What it would mean to think of anorexia as a kind of social or political protest of the anorexia patients, that is, as a resistance that can not just be medicalized, but as a sociological question. What would it mean to think of the dying and the question that they raise, not only as in the abstract of the moral philosophical question, but also in the politics of managing life in hospitals today? So this would be the broader context, and I hope we reach that as well. Let me, before we begin, thank the people who have initiated this conference. First and foremost, Itamar Mann, who is sitting to my left, along with Yoav Kenny, who turned to the center and proposed this topic, as well as the people in the center, and specifically Chagai Boaz, who has been, as always, most beneficial to making this actually happen.